Okay, shall we start? So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Ellie from BSI Philippines, and I'll be your facilitator for today's webinar, Making a Difference in the Built Environment with BEAM. Joining us today is BSI's Built Environment Sector Development Director for APAC region, Kok Wee Tan. He has worked in various disciplines within the construction sector, starting his career with main contractors, gaining valuable site experiences through several project management roles. And as BSI Sector Development Director for the APAC region, he enables partnership with key industry stakeholders and clients in furthering their pursuit for resilience and success. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel, and I'll bring them up at the end of the talk. Now, without further ado, I'll turn the mic to Kok Wee. Kok Wee, over to you.
Thanks, Ellie. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kok Wee Tan. I'm the APAC Director for Built Environment and been with BSI for the past probably 14 months now. And thanks for registering in today's webinar. And what we're going to do today is really just to go through a quick introduction of what is 19650 Part 1 and Part 2, and also run through some of the business benefits. Yeah. Just as what Ellie has mentioned, any questions, please put it into the question box, and we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of the session. Yeah. Okay. Very quickly, I would like to. Oops. Hang on. Very quickly, I'll first like to start with introducing who are we, BSI, right? BSI in fact started back in year 1901, and that is where to today, if you look at this particular slide on the top left-hand corner, this is actually our purpose since 1901. Yeah, inspiring trust for a more resilient world. And how do we do this is really working for a public good to improve, standardize, and simplify business systems. And so this is what we set out to do. Yeah, through what means? Through the means of standards. Yeah, the British standards, the BS standards, the ISO standards, and so on and so forth, and using it as a common language and a common platform and vehicle in business dealings across geographies, yeah, in building a more resilient world. And BSI ourselves, any profit that we make from training, certification, and so on and so forth goes back into the organization because we are a Royal Charter company. And what we do is we reinvest these profits back into the development of future standards or the updates of current standards. Yeah, so we are always looking at making things happen with standards. You know, what do we lack in the industry? What are the trends, and what standards are required in meeting these future trends, and so on and so forth. So it's always channeled back into the development of standards. Yeah, and you will also realize that we are actually the UN national standard boards. Yeah, standard body. Yeah. Okay. Some fun facts here. Yeah. We BSI are proud to say that 51% of the top 100 global construction companies actually uses us in some form of certification. You'll be familiar with 9,000 certification, 14,000 certification, 45,000 certification. Yeah, and also clients use us for cybersecurity, business continuity, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so 51% of top 100 mostly use us in terms of their certification needs. Yeah, and we are proud to say that clients in more than 90 countries actually uses about 190 solutions of ours. So you may think 190 solutions, what are they, right? Mainly in training and certification across the breadth of standards, across the breadth of what we offer in terms of knowledge. Yeah, and we organize ourselves such that, you know, we transfer knowledge and assist clients with knowledge, upskill and uplift. Yep. The last box you will see, we own in fact more than 3,000 standards in the construction sector. So many of you will be familiar with the BS standards for concreting, formwork, M&A works, and so on and so forth. So that is actually sitting in BSI's library of standards. So we are one of the main contributors in the construction standards. Yep. So these are some fun facts numbers with BSI in the build sector. Okay, for the next 25 minutes, I'm going to run through a few topics with you. I'll first start with a quick recap on the principles of what is BIM. Yeah. And then I will also go into a quick introduction of what it means with BIM adoption in terms of the strategic, rebuilding a strategic future. Yeah. And why should your organization adopt BIM? What could be the business benefits? And then we look at, do you have a strategy? Then what do you do if you do not have? And then I'll run into a high-level introduction of what is 19650 and how it supports your business opportunities. Last but not least, in terms of people, how do you start with BIM? People, where do you start from? Yeah. And last but not least, of course, the Q&A session. Okay. Okay. All right. So we start with a bit of definition here. Building information modeling, or in short, BIM. If we look on the box on the left, it basically are worded descriptions of BIM. Yeah. So I'll just read that out. The first pointer you see, building information modeling, or BIM, is a process of generating and managing building data during its life cycle. So here the keywords is managing building data. Yeah. The next pointer will be the process produces, which encompasses building geometries, spatial relationships, geographic information, and quantities, and also properties of building components. So basically the data are all this, yeah, and how you manage them and how you put them together. So that is the theory, the word description or definition of BIM. But if you look across to the box on the right, this will give you a very clear visual of what you need to do in BIM, or what BIM means to you. Right? BIM defines a set of processes in these three bubbles: how you manage, how you produce, and how you exchange of all this information. Yeah, in the design, construction, and management of building or infrastructure. So as long as you're in the build sector, as long as there's a project, you can use BIM. It's a matter of setting up a process or processes to manage the production and exchange of information in a transparent, in a collaborative, and a timely manner. So this would be that, layman definition of BIM. Yeah. Okay, then why BIM? When you look at BIM, you ask yourself questions: why should we use BIM, or why should we adopt BIM? If I go with the anti-clockwise, I start anti-clockwise on the left. Of course, there could be some government mandates. That's why organizations need to implement BIM. And some organizations have the desire to have more control and greater quality assurance in today's environment, and the ease of data access as well. But of course, then you also look at larger projects, the complexity of projects, and could BIM help you in there? Of course, then you also look at how you can upskill your business, right, from where you are today to the next level. Could BIM be also a vehicle in this upskilling initiative? And of course, you look at international opportunities where BIM could be a common language to speak across geographies. Yeah. Nonetheless, when we have the opportunity to speak with a lot of clients, two things springs out very clearly in terms of BIM adaptation. Yeah. One is cost saving and one is productivity gains. Right? We look at today's environment with cost, material cost, it is always on up. Yeah. Labor cost, again, yeah, it stagnates a little bit, always on up again. Productivity gains, how do you build more effectively, save time, less rework, less clashes, and so on and so forth. So these are all the key questions, and that the ecosystem of the built environment is looking to overcome. Yeah. And could BIM be a vehicle in this? Definitely it has a role in there. Back in 2018, there is this study done by a report published by the Boston Consulting Group, right? And they did a lot of surveys back then. What springs out from the surveys were three key ambitions of clients or contractors or asset owners. One is, how can they reduce construction costs? So earlier we mentioned cost, yeah, and also the whole life cycle or whole life cost of the asset. Next, in construction, we use a lot of materials, and we are one of the sector with the biggest consumption of materials. Yeah, and then how can we reduce environmental impact through the use of all these materials? This is one consideration as well. And last but not least is about increasing urbanization. United Nations actually did mention in today's world, 55% of the world's population live in urban areas, and they're estimating the year 2050, 68 to 70% of the world's population would be living in urban areas. So this urbanization, increasing urbanization, also requires the build sector to again look at how they can build faster, build more efficiently at a lower cost, hopefully. Yeah. And would BIM sit in here? Definitely, right? So it could be a strategic route to building a good commercial future, right? And then we look at trends. Yeah, how does BEAM sit in trends? You look at future industry dynamics and the current disruptions, right? You look at the box on the left, which is in red, right? You look at some keywords there or some key dynamics: specialization, value chain control, investment in technology, and the current disruptions. The word that springs up is digitalization. And when you put all this together, BEAM does have this element in there in terms of being specialized, in terms of technology, in terms of digital, in terms of supply chain control as well. So BEAM fits in the current trend and the future trend. So we are already there at the doorstep. Yep. Now we look at some of the clients that has actually in fact implemented BEAM over the years. And one of the early adopters were RTA, which is the Rail Transport and Authority in Dubai. What they found after implementing BEAM, when they put in all their KPIs in terms of measuring how BEAM benefits them, over the years, they found that the reduction in cost went up to 10%, and they had time saving of about 15% on average. So the element of cost, this is what they were driving in terms of reducing, and this is what they found when after implementing BEAM over the years. And we look at designer or specifiers. Wilmot Dixon is one of the key designer in UK. What they found was that when they implement BEAM, they found that they are able to drive more timely data-informed decisions. With the implementation of BEAM. So everything was spot on, everything was timely. They could make informed decisions very, very quickly. So they minimize the delays from their end as well, which is one of the key in our build sector. In terms of specifiers getting the approvals and so on and so forth on many areas of the work, and passing on to the next course of actions on site. So this is where they really reduce a lot of time with the implementation of BEAM. What about contractors? Main contractors, subcontractors. Taylor Woodruff, which is one of the key contractors in UK as well. They found that with BEAM, the handing over process to the owners was much easier, because with BEAM, all the information are collated and collected till the end stage, and it would already be there. So during the handover, they found that it's very easy to hand over, because they don't have to then struggle to piece things together, as-built drawings, blah, 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 put them together for the handover, which is a big exercise. But it was already in progress to the handover stage, whereby then handover is easy. This is what they found. And Legrand, we know that they're one of the suppliers, bigger brand in the M&E world. They found that the collaboration, the early stage brand presence with BEAM is what is one of the biggest benefit that they've gotten out of it. So here you look at the business benefits from owners right now to the suppliers. We saw cost savings, we saw time improvement, we saw ease of handing over, we saw timely decision from the suppliers, or rather the specifiers, and we saw an early presence from the supplier front. So these are some of the key benefits that came out of what these organizations implementing BEAM have found out throughout the years. So for yourself, for organizations that is looking at BEAM, how do they start? Where do they start? What should they consider? Of course, there's both external and internal drivers, and these are not everything is represented on this slide, but these are some of the key drivers that you could look at. You can look at external drivers, government mandate again, whether there's mandate, whether you need to comply, and then what about opportunities with BEAM? Do you get more opportunities with BEAM across geography within the country, and so on and so forth? Internal drivers, are you looking at cost saving, productivity savings, winning more tenders, and so on and so forth? Also sustainability. BEAM is also a consideration for an organization's sustainability in their business and upscaling as well. So these are all the drivers that you could consider when you are adopting BEAM. But one thing that I would like to highlight is organizational change. Once management decide, we want to go with BEAM, we want to adopt BEAM, then there is a mindset shift, there's a cultural shift in the way the organization does things, with the projects when they implement BEAM. So when we look at the aspects of the projects, there's many aspects in the different phases of the projects, from design, right down to procurement, right down to site management, right down to safety management even. There are all the various stakeholders in there, the responsible stakeholders. they own information. Yeah, they generate information, they own information. In conventional ways, in conventional methods, these informations, some are shared, some are not shared, some are timely, some are not timely, some are shared, some are updated, but not shared. Yeah. Then what happens? The ripple effect could be rework, could be non-compliance, non-conformity. Yeah. Services clashes, and so on and so forth. That is the conventional method. But with BIM, this information management has to be across all the aspects of works. Yeah, this is the first mindset shift that the organization, the people in the organization with BIM implementation need to realize. It's no longer a silo information management within the very varying degree of work, but this information has to be spread and collaborated in a timely manner across the breadth of all aspects of work. So this is the very first mindset shift. Yeah. Okay, quickly, I'll now run into what is 19650 and how it supports your business opportunities. I'll run into, give you a quick update on what is the BIM standards landscape right now. I'll also give you a bit of a high-level introduction to 19650 Part 2, which is relevant to everyone. And then give you a bit of a view of how is BIM being adopted across the world, around the world, and then how do we support your digital transition. Okay, when you look at this internationalization of BIM, we are proud at BSI to be the first developer of the BIM standards. Yeah, and PAS 1192 was developed in coordinating in putting across a standard that is understood with BIM implementation over or across geographies. That was the initial standards of BIM. Yeah, and today you will realize back in 2018, the PAS became ISO standards Part 1 and Part 2, and in 2020 last year in August, Part 3, which is asset management, became an ISO standard, and in July last year, Part 5, which is security mindedness in BIM, became an ISO standard. So from PAS, we have already moved into ISO 19650 for the global uptake. Yeah. And for Part 4, which is info transfer, we should see it become an ISO standard sometime this year, Q3, Q4, thereabout. PAS Part 6, which is health and safety, could be in due course. Yep. So this is a bit of a landscape of where we started with BIM standards with the PAS, and now transiting into the 19650 Part 1s to Part 5. Okay. As of all ISO standards, we always start with concept and principles. So Part 1 of 19650 is in fact BIM concepts and principles. And what it does in here is it gives you the overview of BIM. Yeah, it tells you what is the viewpoint of BIM with asset lifecycle, what are the core outputs, what are the information requirements. It sets a framework for collaborative production of information. This is very important with Part 1. Yeah, it's all about collaboration with managing and producing information. And then it introduces you the common data environment and tells you how important this or how critical this common data environment is in 19650 with the BIM environment. That's Part 1. Part 2, which all of us in the ecosystem of build would be relevant in here. Yeah, we look at Part 2 is BIM design, construction, and commissioning. It defines the specific information management processes and outputs. So what it does here is, if you look at the pointers there, it tells you from the project initiation, assessment and needs, right down to the tender, right down to the response, appointment of the contractors and specifiers, and so on and so forth. Mobilization, starting the projects, information production, exchange, and then delivery, and finally we hand over the projects, to the client. So this is all described in Part 2. So when an organization says they want to go for a BIM implementation, what is relevant to them? Definitely Part 1 and Part 2 as a start. Yeah. And if they want to go for certification, what could be relevant for them at the start would be Part 1 and Part 2 as well. All right. And now let's look at where all the standards sits across the breadth of a asset life cycle, from brief to design to construction to use of the asset to end life decommissioning. Yeah. We just mentioned Part 2, definitely from initiation to construction to handover. So brief, design, and construction, this is where part 2 sits. So when we hand over the project, when the asset is in use, is where part 3 sits. That's asset management, right down to decommissioning. Part 1, principles, guide and principles sit across the breadth of the asset life cycle. And part 5, security mindedness as well, sit across the breadth. You don't start security mindedness when it's in use stage, right? So you start from day 1 right down to decommissioning in terms of how you manage security with BIM. Yeah. So this is where all the standards sits across the breadth of the asset life cycle. Okay, this diagram is an extremely important diagram that everyone needs to be aware of. Yeah, it's a very simple diagram. It says A, B, C, and some numbers that 1, 2, and 3. So what are A, what are B, and what are C? So in BIM 19650 definition within the standards, A would be the appointing party, which generally would be the owners and would be the owners. B would be the lead appointing party, would generally be the specifiers or the main contractors. And C, the appointed party, would be the subcontractors and suppliers. Yeah, and then of course, then you have the project teams and then the smaller delivery teams and the task teams. Yeah, and these are all defined within the 19650 definition. And coming back to this diagram, I think what we need to realize from this diagram is not the A, B, C's and the 1, 2, 3s. Yeah, they are important. They are the stakeholders in there. But what's really key in this diagram that's representative of BIM ISO 19650 is collaborative BIM. So if you look at all the arrows, the arrow doesn't stop anywhere, right? The arrow goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. A to B, B to C, back to A, back to B, back to A, and so on and so forth. It's always back and forth. So these arrows is the framework for collaborative BIM. It means collaboration, it means transparency, it means timeliness of all the information that is used, that is consumed, that is exchanged within the project. This is what this diagram means, and this is set up in part 1 of 19650 as a framework. Yeah, this is what you need to realize. And in terms of roles and responsibilities, it's clearly defined in the standards as well. What would the owner's responsibilities be, the main contractors, and so on and so forth. So appointing party responsibilities as established in 19650, these are not all, these are just some. If you look at it, the owners need to set out the requirement and milestone of the projects. They need to then say, this is the BIM project, right? We want to have BIM in there. So what is the capacity and capability of their resources on hand and also the supply chain? Yeah, what standards they want to have implemented within the projects has to be very clearly spelled out. And they need to establish the common data environment. What is the platform? What is the CDE that they want to implement in there and have it used? Yeah. In terms of appointments, who do they appoint? And importantly, V&V, verification and validation, right? How do they verify? How do they validate? Are they timely? When do they step in? And so on and so forth. All these are defined within the 19650 for owners who are mentioned as appointing party here. As for the main contractors or the specifiers, which are mentioned as lead appointing party, if you look at these 8 boxes, again, it's not all. If you look at these 8 boxes, there's one word that springs out very, very clearly to you, is information, right? How you cascade, coordinate, collate, or cascade, collate, and coordinate. Yeah, how do you ensure this information is timely? Yeah, and live. Okay, these are within the responsibilities of the lead appointing party. And then, of course, they need to establish the processes or the procedures and manage them, manage the CDE, yeah, ensuring that all information are channeled through the use of the platform of CDE, yeah. And of course, then they have to respect the federation strategy and of course update the MIDP. If you're familiar already with 19650, it will be the Master Information Delivery Plan. One thing that I want to highlight here is the last box at the bottom right. You may involve some training and coaching. This is not for any other trades. This is particular to BIM. So with the supply chain, with the subcontractors and so on and so forth, if they do not have the capacity or the competence in BIM, it may require, as spelled out in 19650, that the lead appointing party take up this responsibility to bring knowledge to them. Yeah. And what about the subcontractors or suppliers who are mentioned as appointing party functions here? For them, simply generate information, make sure that they have the right status, make sure that these status are shared, make sure that it's the latest information, and they must be in there to resolve issues, clashes, and so on and so forth on a timely manner. So this would be the key functions or the responsibilities that's defined in 19650. All right, so these are some of the roles and responsibilities of the various functions. And what are the deliverables as specified in 19650, right? Again, if you already started with BIM somewhere, you will be familiar with OIR, PIR, AIR, EIR, AIM, and PIM. That generally speaking, OIR or organizational information requirements and PIR, which is project information requirements, generally comes from owners. They are mostly non-technical. It goes to the lead appointing party, and it becomes the AIRs and it becomes the EIRs for them to run with the projects. And then, of course, when you finish the project, you go to AIM, and in between you have the PIM as well, right? So this would be the deliverables. I'm not going to go into the details how we describe this and how we make this happen, but generally these would be the deliverables as specified in 19650 through the CD environment. Yeah. So again, if you look at this particular slide, appointed party, lead appointed party, and appointed party, their roles and responsibilities with information management through the CD environment is clearly stated here. All right. So how you specify, how you communicate, how you deliver, how you ensure tasks can be met, how you produce for validation. So all this is spread and all this is clearly defined in 19650. And critically, it spells out that it has all to be in a CD environment. All right. Then what is a CD environment? It's a set of processes for storing, managing, and disseminating information. All right. Again, I won't go into the details of what the CD should be or what it could be, but nonetheless, it has to be shared, published, archived, and what is a work in progress. So again, the keywords here is collaboration, timeliness, and transparency through a CD environment. Okay. Now, you may be interested in how then a certification body or an auditor look at how you demonstrate compliance of a CD environment, or how you yourself can determine compliance in CD environment that is working well. Yeah, the bubbles, the diagram on the right tells you everything. Yeah, how you set it up, what are the user groups, would the people know how to use this CD environment, how you store information, who gains access, what's the security measures in there, how systems talk to each other, how could you share, the naming conventions of all your containers, the status, and if things are superseded and so on and so forth, how you destroy them, and it goes back again. So these are all the elements. If you have touched on all these elements and you comply and you satisfy all these, your CD environment is working well for you. Yeah. So this is some of the key indicators of whether your CD environment is in compliance with the 19650 standards. Okay, now I would like to share with you a little bit of a global adaptation of BIM. Yeah, and if you look at this world chart, I call it maturing, and adaptation, and so on and so forth, the different color codes in these geographies, right? I'll just like to share with you some things that we found with this maturity of BIM adaptation across the world. In US and Canada, what we found is progressing actually quite rapidly since they started using BIM, and it's mostly for governmental projects. But nonetheless, we also see private projects picking up with BIM as well. In Europe itself, of course, we know UK were the first users of BIM, and generally is used widely across UK. Interestingly, in Sweden, it's not mandated, but nonetheless, the use of BIM is very widespread. Probably 9 out of 10 projects are already using BIM. And then in Holland is used for mostly government projects. But what we can see in Europe, the infrastructure projects across Europe, the various countries of Europe, they would want to use BIM as a common language with infrastructure projects across Europe. So this we see happening. And in Asia, I would just like to mention probably 2 or 3 countries. In Hong Kong, we see them using BIM a lot for projects that is greater than 30 million HK dollars, and that's mandated, right? So the industry is using a lot of BIM because most of the key projects or most of the bigger projects is already mandated BIM with 30 million as a benchmark. And China, interestingly, we see the government projects are mandating BIM. And also, the other fun fact is we also see an uptake of clients, the owners, the asset owners, wanting to have BIMs in their projects. Yeah, because why? Cost savings, productivity, efficiency, and so on and so forth. These are their considerations. Yeah, in Singapore, any projects that's greater than or equal to 5,000 square meters has to go through a BIM e-submission for all the approvals of the plans, the structural plans, the archi plans to the government agencies has to be through BIM e-submissions. Government projects, we do mandate BIM a little bit more, and that's where the status of Singapore is. Yeah. So generally, if I put all this together, you can see that BIM adoption over the years, actually, in fact, in recent 2 or 3 years, has really gone north. Yeah, it's really on upswing. And with BSI, we see a lot of clients actually coming to us, inquiring about certification to ISO 19650 across geographies, in fact. Yeah. And this is where I'm going to share with you, this is not all, but these are some of the clients who are certified to BIM, whether it's PAS 1192, transiting into 19650, or certified to 19650. These are some of the clients. You will find some familiar names in here. Yeah, you can see Gaiman, you can see Legrand, you can see some of the Parsons, and so on and so forth. All right, Dragaj, and so on and so forth in Hong Kong. And we continue to see these inquiries coming in. Yeah, so year to date, we have already certified close to 350 thereabout clients to BIM 19650 or the previous standards of 1192, which they are transiting into 19650. Yeah, as of this moment. Okay, so this will give you a little bit of view of BIM in the world today. Yeah. So we started with what is definition of BIM, then we look at, you know, why BIM, we look at some of the benefits, what are future trends or current trends, and then we look at a little bit deeper into what is 19650, what is the landscape. We looked at then what is relevant to you. Part 2 is definitely relevant. We look at where the standards sit across the asset life cycle, and then now we are looking at where it's sitting across the world, yeah, in terms of BIM adoption. Yeah. So what could your BIM journey be, right? When you seriously consider implementing BIM or want to make BIM as a part of life in today, moving into the future. Yeah. So first thing first, we advise you to definitely purchase the BIM standards to read. Yeah, get familiarized with what are the requirements in there. Yeah, and then you can look for certain trainings to upskill yourself. Yeah. And then, of course, if there's mandatory, you need to comply, or you want to go for certification to look for improvements and so on and so forth, then you can go for certification. So it's always buying the standards, go for some form of training, and then certification later on. Yeah, and in terms of training, yeah, why invest in training? Why don't you just buy the standards and read and just implement them? Yeah, I think training people is very important. Of course, process and technology is part of why you invest as well. But investing in people is definitely important in terms of their knowledge. Because BIM today, when we look at the BIM environment, people working in BIM is pretty specific in what they do. Yeah, so the job function is pretty specific. And in terms of skills and knowledge, do they stop there or do they upgrade? Do they get more out of the 19650? And how do they own it? Yeah. So these are all the considerations that individuals should consider when you're in a BIM environment, and organizations to consider in how you uplift your internal resources, your people who are key to you. You know, knowledge is extremely important with 19650, and also, of course, your skills in BIM. Yeah. So this is why you should consider investing in the people and in yourself. Yeah. And when you look at investing, then if you want to look at a roadmap, yeah, if we try to put out a roadmap here, in where do you start? How do you upgrade yourself with knowledge in 19650? Yeah, first thing first, on the left, you start with what are the fundamentals of BIM? Yeah, and then when you're in there working, the practical implementation experience, but over time, you should be looking at also how you understand more in depth about project delivery, right down to security mindset. Yeah, so we always start with BIM fundamentals. That is my advice to anyone who was adopting BIM or is in BIM. Yeah, and what we have in BSI, we actually have this course called BIM Fundamentals. So I will always say begin with BIM. So some clients, when I speak with them, they will ask me, who should attend this course? I would say anybody in the BIM environment. Of course, may not be everyone, yeah, but if you're interested, you're keen to know more about BIM 19650, because you may have a specific role in the breadth of 19650, specific role. But how do you understand the whole concept of 19650 from part 1 to part 5 or even part 6? So these fundamentals will run through the overview of the standards from part 1 to part 6 or even part 5 to give you that view, so that you know in your role, in a specific role, what it means to others and what others means to you in that BIM environment of 19650. Yeah, and this will help you to know where you stand and to know how important your role is in your collaboration, your attitude of collaboration and your behavior of collaboration in using BIM. I think this is extremely important. And who is it for? It's actually for anybody in the ecosystem. So for us, I think as a first step to purchase a standard, read them, but also organizational change. BIM fundamentals could be the first step in organizational change in how you can bring people into BIM and understand BIM or know BIM 19650. Yeah. And BSI Philippines actually have the first class scheduled for 23rd and 24th November 2021, which you can reach out to Philippines, BSI Philippines. Yeah, it's 23rd and 24th November this year. It's online. Yeah, in the comfort of your home or in an office. The tutor will share with you the fundamentals of 1 to 5 and also some of part 6. Okay, then I'll just have this to share in terms of what we do in terms of certification. We have the BSI Kite Mark, and if you look at the diagram on the left, we are looking at how you bring BIM into life, into your projects. It's project-based evidence, yeah, and we look at elements of your BIM processes, how you manage them, what your collaborative engagement, how your clients see your BIM implementation, what's the feedback, and how do you have any form of security-minded approach, even though you may not have implemented part 5, but there should be some form of security-minded approach, because again, it's digital, yeah. You want to keep some information in a good way, yeah. So this is a certification that we can offer for organizations, yeah. And so, yeah, that's it. For the past half an hour or so, I've done a bit of a recap of BIM, what it means to you in commercial future, how could you adopt BIM, how could you start, what is 19650, and how could you upskill yourself with BIM fundamentals. Yep. So yep, that's that. And thank you very much. And I'll hand it back to Oliver, and if there's any questions that I could help to answer.
Okay, thank you for that wonderful presentation, Kakwi. All right, we have reached the end of our presentation, and we will go ahead and take some time for the questions now. Just a reminder to please be sure to type in your questions into the question box in your control panel, and then we will take it one by one. So, okay, so we have a question right here. It says, which professionals and which areas can apply BIM?
Okay. Like I mentioned, right, with BIM, right, everybody has a specific role in there, from owners right down to the suppliers, yeah, and even the task members, yeah. Everybody has a defined responsibilities in in ISO 19650. So if you ask me, if the question is who then is relevant here in terms of applications or in terms of knowledge, I would say across the whole ecosystem, no one should be left out, yeah. Do not be, my advice here is, or my answer would be, do not be focused on just a particular part of BIM, say part 2 only, but you'll be very keen to know how part 2 influences part 3 and how part 5 plays in across the asset lifecycle, which is security. Yeah, so all these are important topics, and do not just stay in your sphere of where you are with 19650. I would say open up and get to know the whole all the standards. At least know them, read them, know them, or be guided in there with some trainings, know them, and this is definitely very helpful in how you understand 19650 in BIM. Yep.
Okay, so that's it. And there's a follow-up question. It says, what should I be concerned with when starting down the BEAM path?
Okay. I think as an individual, you definitely want to have some form of guided training. That's number one. Knowledge, yeah, knowledge is very important. As an organization, then you really seriously need to consider your resources in terms of who could be the champion, who could be the one that is championing BIM 19650 implementation across the breadth of your organization, because this champion is extremely important. This person or this task force is extremely important because they are the one to assist, to help, to change, and to make sure that they are there for anyone to have questions or have queries or clarifications about why they are doing it. Yeah, this is extremely important. Of course, nonetheless, the last important piece is definitely management. When management decides to say BIM implementation, do not just say BIM implementation and have the task force running. That is just my personal opinion. I would say be there, know what's going on, know what are the challenges, be there to help overcome the challenges. A lot of time is about competence, is about capacity, about understanding. Be there
Mhm.
and afford them that time or those resources to help them reach there. Yeah.
Okay, so do you have any questions from the audience? Okay, so we have another question. It's pretty straightforward. Is BIM a software?
Oh, okay. This is a bit of a misconception. Yeah. I think when BIM started maybe 10 over years ago, everybody were running to software. So BIM, everybody get trained on software. And they try to say that I'm using BIM, I'm into BIM because I have a software that talks to each other, or I'm using a software around BIM. Yeah. It's in fact
Mhm.
not just software. This is the common misunderstanding, or some of the misunderstanding in users of BIM. Yeah, BIM is actually a management system. It is not a software. Software is just a vehicle to make BIM happen. Yeah. So softwares are important. Software is where you keep information. Software is how you digitalize, and software is what you use to exchange information. Yeah. But the thing here is BIM is actually in fact a management system. If you look at part two, there's a 9001 element in there. If you look at asset management, there's a 55,000 element in there. If you look at security mindedness, there's ISO security information of 27,000 in there. So it is management system. It's not solely software. Software is only one of the vehicle in there. Yep.
Okay, so there you go. BIM is not a software.
Yep.
And there's also a question right here. Can we adapt BIM to an ongoing project?
Oh, I think this is a tricky question. I think ongoing projects, because if you look at the deliverables from OIR right down to AIM and so on and so forth, you do need some form of OIR. Yeah. But then if you have BIM, let's say in the middle of construction, and you say I want to implement BIM, I'm not saying it's impossible, but honestly, it's quite tough. You can do it, but you need to do a bit of backtracking in terms of how do you then piece your current information into the BIM arena or into the CDE. Yeah. So I would say cannot, but a little bit more difficult. I think a fresh project, a new project. That's why the clients and the mandates on projects or the type of projects as a starting point would be the best. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. And for our last question from the audience, do we see a higher ratio of BIM implementation in civil engineering or architecture?
Okay. From my experience with clients and in the built environment across APAC, because I'm an APAC person, I see a good ratio of mix in terms of almost 50-50. But generally, most BIM starts with building contracts, building projects. Yeah, that means there's a structure, is building, is a tower or a couple of towers plus car park and so on and so forth. It generally starts there, but we also see the shift into infra as well. So BIM is not dominant. It should not be dominant in just building projects, but the BIM platform or the use of BIM, because it's collaborative BIM, is information sharing and exchange. It applies to infrastructure as well. So it's not 50-50 yet, or not 50-60 or 60-40 and so on and so forth, but we see an uptrend in infra. It always starts with buildings. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, thank you for that, KH. So, do we have any questions from the audience? We'll be closing the question and answer portion in three, two, and one. So, it looks like we've covered all of our questions. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap up, KH?
No, I think for me, I really appreciate the attendance, and I hope in the last half an hour and a bit more, the high level sharing in terms of how you should look at BEAM, how you could look at the benefits, some decisions you need to make both individually and at the organizational level, and and what is the mindset shift that people need to realize, when they start working with BIM. I hope in the last half an hour or so, I brought this across, and thank you for the attention.
That's it. Thank you so much, Cage, for sharing your expertise and knowledge with us today. And that's it. Great. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here, and don't miss any updates from us by following us in our social media accounts in LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And again, thanks for joining us today, and we will see you next time. Bye, everyone, and stay safe.
Bye.